The kitchen clock read 4:47 p.m. when my phone buzzed with a message that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I was standing at the counter of my modest two-bedroom apartment in Toledo, Ohio, spreading mustard on rye bread for my solitary dinner, when the screen lit up with a text from my old fishing buddy, Dennis. Saw something troubling at your son's place today. Girl looked distressed, might want to check in. I stared at those words, the butter knife frozen in my hand, mayo dripping onto the counter unnoticed. Dennis wasn't the type to send cryptic messages or meddle in family affairs. For him to reach out like this meant something was genuinely wrong. My son Marcus lived 40 minutes away in a subdivision near Bowling Green, in one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looked vaguely the same and everyone pretended their lives were perfect. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. It had been that way for 8 months now, ever since Victoria passed. My wife of 43 years had been the glue holding our fractured family together, always making excuses for Marcus's temper, always smoothing over the rough edges of family gatherings with her infectious laugh and generous spirit. Without her, the cracks had become chasms. I picked up my phone and called Marcus directly. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. His voice, professionally cheerful, asked me to leave a message. I didn't. Instead, I called again and again. On the 4th attempt, someone finally picked up. "Dad," Marcus's voice was clipped, irritated. "I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "Dennis sent me a text about Elena," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Is everything all right?" There was a pause, just long enough to send my instincts into overdrive. I'd been a machinist for 38 years before retiring, and I'd learned to trust those instincts when something didn't fit quite right. "Everything's fine," Marcus said, his voice too controlled. "Elena's just going through a teenage phase. You know how 16-year-old girls can be." I knew exactly how 16-year-old girls could be. I'd raised one, Marcus's sister Sarah, who was now a pediatric nurse in California. She'd been moody and dramatic and exhausting at times, but I'd never once worried about her safety in her own home. "Let me talk to her," I said. "She's doing homework. I'll have her call you later." "Marcus, put your daughter on the phone." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear voices in the background, muffled and indistinct. Then the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at my half-made sandwich, feeling that old familiar anger rising in my chest, the kind Victoria used to calm with a gentle hand on my shoulder and a reminder to think before acting. But Victoria wasn't here anymore, and something in my gut was screaming that my granddaughter needed me. I grabbed my keys and my heavy winter coat, the one with Victoria's favorite scarf still tucked in the pocket. The evening news was predicting temperatures would drop to 12 degrees after sunset. Not the coldest February we'd ever seen in Ohio, but cold enough to be dangerous if you weren't properly dressed. My truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 that had seen better days but still ran like a dream, was parked in its usual spot under the apartment building's carport. I climbed in, turned the key, and waited for the engine to warm up while I tried Marcus's number one more time, straight to voicemail. He'd blocked me. The drive to Bowling Green usually took about 40 minutes, but tonight I made it in 32. The roads were mostly clear, though patches of black ice gleamed menacingly under the streetlights. The radio played classic country, Merle Haggard singing about Mama Tried, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles white. Elena, my bright, beautiful granddaughter with Victoria's green eyes and quick wit. The girl who used to spend every summer with us, helping her grandmother in the garden and learning to fish on Lake Erie. The girl who'd gradually stopped visiting over the past 3 years, always with some excuse about school or friends or extracurricular activities. I'd been willfully blind, I realized now. All those canceled visits, all those brief, uncomfortable phone calls where Elena sounded wooden and rehearsed. I'd chalked it up to teenage independence and Marcus's new marriage to Bethany, a woman who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. The GPS announced my exit, and I took the ramp onto Route 25. heading toward the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision where Marcus had bought his dream home 4 years ago. It was one of those aggressively modern neighborhoods, all sharp angles and enormous windows, designed more for Instagram photos than actual comfortable living. Marcus's house was at the end of Sycamore Court, a sprawling 2-story with a 3-car garage and a yard that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly rent. His Tesla was parked in the driveway alongside Bethany's white Mercedes SUV. Every window in the house blazed with warm light, and I could see the flicker of what looked like a television through the front room windows. Picture perfect, just like always. I parked my truck across the street, suddenly uncertain. What if Dennis had been mistaken? What if I was overreacting, seeing threats where none existed? Marcus would never forgive me for barging into his home on a Friday evening based on nothing but a vague text message and my own paranoia. But then I saw her. Elena appeared at one of the upstairs windows, pressing her palm against the glass. Even from this distance, I could see she was wearing only a thin t-shirt, no sweater or jacket despite the freezing temperatures. She stood there for just a moment before a hand, larger, adult, pulled her back away from the window and the curtain snapped shut. That was all I needed to see. I was out of the truck and across the street before I'd consciously made the decision to move. The walkway to Marcus's front door was meticulously cleared of snow, lined with solar lights that cast a welcoming glow. I didn't bother with the doorbell. My fist hammered on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Marcus, open this door!" Silence. I could hear movement inside, hushed voices, the sound of footsteps moving quickly across hardwood floors. I pounded again, harder this time. "Marcus, I saw Elena in the window. I know she's here. Open the goddamn door." More silence. Then finally, the sound of locks disengaging. The door opened just wide enough for Marcus to slip out onto the porch, pulling it shut behind him. He was dressed in expensive casual clothes, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. His hair was perfectly styled, his face carefully composed into an expression of mild annoyance. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" "I want to see Elena." "This isn't a good time. Bethany and I were just about to have dinner with the Hendersons from next door." "I don't give a damn about the Hendersons," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Where is my granddaughter?" Marcus sighed, the exasperated sound of a man dealing with an unreasonable child. "Elena is fine. She's in her room doing homework, and I'd appreciate it if you'd respect our family time." "Then let me see her. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "No." Marcus crossed his arms, his jaw set in that stubborn way I remembered from his teenage years. "You can't just show up unannounced and demand to see my daughter. We have boundaries, Dad. Healthy boundaries." The word healthy coming from his mouth almost made me laugh. There was nothing healthy about the fear I'd seen in Elena's eyes through that window. Nothing healthy about the way she'd been yanked away from view. "Fine," I said, taking a step back. "Then I'll call Child Protective Services and have them check on her welfare." Marcus's carefully composed expression cracked. Just for a moment, I saw anger flash across his face. Real anger, the kind he'd inherited from his own father and spent years learning to control. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." We stood there in a standoff, father and son, separated by more than just the 3 decades between us. Marcus had always been my difficult child, the one who pushed boundaries and tested limits. But I'd loved him fiercely, defended him against Victoria's concerns, made excuses for his temper and his need for control. Now looking at him blocking his own front door while his daughter was somewhere inside, possibly in danger, I wondered how many other things I'd willfully ignored. "She's being punished," Marcus said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "Elena broke house rules, and she's facing consequences. That's called good parenting, not abuse." "What rules did she break?" "That's between me and my daughter." "What rules?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the closed door, then back at me. "She was disrespectful to Bethany at breakfast, called her a name. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior in our home. So you're punishing her by what? Making her stand by the window in a t-shirt when it's 12 degrees outside? She's not by the window. She's in her room, which is perfectly warm. You're overreacting, just like you always do. The accusation stung because there was some truth to it. I did have a temper, did tend to see threats everywhere, especially after Victoria died and I lost my anchor. But this wasn't overreacting. This was a grandfather's instinct screaming that something was very, very wrong. Let me see her, Marcus. Let me talk to Elena for 5 minutes, and if she tells me everything's fine, I'll leave and never mention this again. No. Then I'm calling CPS right now. I pulled out my phone, finger hovering over the screen. Marcus moved so fast I barely saw it coming. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to make my fingers go numb. For a moment, we stood there frozen, and I saw something in my son's eyes that made my blood run cold. It was the same look I'd seen in my own father's eyes decades ago, right before I twisted my arm free, took 2 steps back and brought up my phone. Dad, don't... But I was already dialing. Not CPS. I didn't even know if they had a hotline I could call at 5:30 on a Friday evening. Instead, I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at 2847 Sycamore Court in Bowling Green, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Marcus's face as the color drained from it. I'm concerned about the welfare of a minor in this residence. My granddaughter, I believe she may be in danger. Sir, what makes you believe? Just send someone, please. I hung up before the dispatcher could ask more questions. Marcus stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part fury, part disbelief, part something that might have been fear. You have no idea what you just did, he said quietly. I know exactly what I did. I protected my granddaughter. She's my daughter, and she's my blood. If you've got nothing to hide, then having the police check on her welfare shouldn't be a problem, should it? We stood there in tense silence, neither of us willing to back down. Behind Marcus, I could see shadows moving behind the frosted glass of the front door. Bethany, probably, listening to every word. You're going to regret this, Marcus said. When they find nothing wrong, when Elena tells them everything's fine, you're going to look like a paranoid old fool, and then you'll never see her again. I'll make sure of that. The threat hung in the cold air between us. Part of me, the rational part that Victoria had always appealed to, wondered if he was right. What if I was overreacting? What if this destroyed what little relationship I had left with my son? But then, I remembered Elena's hand pressed against that window, remembered the fear in her eyes, and I knew I'd made the right choice. The sirens reached us before the flashing lights did. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the house, and I could see curtains twitching in neighboring windows as Marcus's perfect suburban neighbors took notice of the disturbance. An officer stepped out of the first car, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Someone called about a welfare check? She asked, approaching the porch. That was me, I said, stepping forward. I'm Richard Burke. My granddaughter lives here, and I'm concerned for her safety. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, his professional voice back in place. Officer, my father is... He's been struggling since my mother died. He's not thinking clearly. The officer looked between us, clearly assessing the situation. Sir, she said to Marcus, I need to verify the welfare of any minors in the residence. That's standard protocol. Of course, Marcus said smoothly. Too smoothly. But I need to prepare my daughter first. She has anxiety, and seeing police officers might trigger an episode. I'll need to see her within the next few minutes, sir. Absolutely. Just give me a moment to... Now, sir? The second officer, a younger man with a notebook already out, stepped onto the porch. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he finally stepped aside and opened the door. The house was exactly as I remembered from my last visit 6 months ago. Immaculate, sterile, more showroom than home. Everything in its place. Not a cushion out of alignment. Not a single family photo that looked candid or genuine. The only new addition was a large portrait over the fireplace. Marcus, Bethany, and Bethany's 2 young sons from her first marriage. Elena wasn't in the picture. "Where is Elena?" the female officer asked. "Upstairs," Marcus said. "Second door on the right, but please let me go up first. We'll accompany you, sir." I followed them up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The second-floor hallway was lined with more perfectly arranged photos. Marcus and Bethany's wedding, the boys at various sporting events, a vacation to Hawaii. Again, no Elena. Marcus stopped in front of a closed door with a simple wooden sign that said Elena's room in cheerful purple letters. He knocked. "Elena, sweetheart, there are some police officers here who want to make sure you're okay. I'm going to open the door now. All right?" No response. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was freezing. That was the first thing I noticed, a blast of cold air that had me instinctively pulling my coat tighter. The window was wide open, curtains billowing in the icy wind, and snow had blown in to create a small drift on the hardwood floor beneath the sill. Elena sat on her bed, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering so violently her teeth were chattering. She was still wearing just that t-shirt I'd seen from outside, along with a pair of thin pajama pants. Her lips had a bluish tinge, and her fingers clutching the blanket were bone white. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, pushing past the officers. "Elena!" I rushed to the window and slammed it shut, then grabbed another blanket from her closet and wrapped it around her shoulders. "How long has this window been open?" She looked up at me with Victoria's green eyes, and they were filled with such resignation, such defeat, that I felt something inside me break. "Since lunch," she whispered. "Since lunch?" I whirled on Marcus. "It's been below freezing all day." "She opened it herself," Marcus said calmly, though I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I told her to close it, but she was being defiant." "That's not true," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "You opened it. You said I needed to cool off after—" "Elena, that's enough." Bethany's voice cut through from the hallway. She stood in the doorway, perfectly coiffed and composed, wearing a cashmere dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Don't make this worse with your lies." The female officer turned to Elena. "Honey, I'm Officer Martinez. Can you tell me what happened today?" Elena glanced at her father, then at Bethany, and I could see her physically shrinking into herself. I broke a rule." "What rule?" "I was disrespectful at breakfast." "And what was your punishment?" Silence. "Elena," Officer Martinez said gently, kneeling beside the bed, "I need you to tell me the truth. No one is going to be angry with you." "She's trying to get attention," Bethany said. "Elena has been increasingly difficult since Elena," Officer Martinez said gently, kneeling beside the bed. "I need you to tell me the truth. No one is going to be angry with you." "She's trying to get attention," Bethany said. "Elena has been increasingly difficult since Marcus and I got married. Her therapist says it's a phase." "I'd like to hear from Elena," Officer Martinez said, not unkindly but firmly. My granddaughter's hands were shaking as she pulled the blanket tighter. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear. I called Bethany by her first name instead of Mom. She said it was disrespectful. Dad agreed. "So She swallowed hard. "He said I needed to sit by the open window and think about how cold and unwelcoming I was being to Bethany." "How long were you sitting here?" "Since noon." I looked at my watch. 6:15 p.m., over 6 hours. "That's not what happened," Marcus said quickly. "She opened the window herself after I sent her to her room. I didn't know it was open until my father started pounding on the door." "Dad, please," Elena said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "Please just tell them the truth." "I am telling the truth. You're lying to get sympathy, just like you always do." Officer Martinez stood up and exchanged a look with her partner. "Mr. Burke, I need you to step out into the hallway with Officer Thompson. Mrs. Burke, you too, please." "This is our home," Marcus started. "Now, sir." As Marcus and Bethany filed out reluctantly, Officer Martinez closed the door, leaving just her, me, and Elena in the freezing room. She pulled out a small device from her belt, a thermometer, I realized. Let's see how cold it really is in here. The device beeped after a few seconds. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. 43 degrees. Elena had been sitting in a 43-degree room by an open window in nothing but a t-shirt and pajama pants for over 6 hours in Ohio in February. Elena, Officer Martinez said, her voice gentle but urgent. Has this happened before? My granddaughter nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Can you tell me about other times? Last month, he locked me in the basement overnight because I forgot to take out the recycling. And before that, he made me stand in the garage in my bare feet for 2 hours because I got a B on a history test. And her voice cracked. And sometimes he doesn't let me eat dinner if he thinks I've been disrespectful. Bethany says it's teaching me consequences, but I just want my grandma back. She would never have let this happen. I felt tears burning in my own eyes. Victoria, God, Victoria, you were right about him. You were right all along, and I didn't listen. Officer Martinez was writing everything down, her face professionally neutral, but her eyes blazing with controlled anger. Elena, I need you to understand something very important. What your father and stepmother are doing, that's not punishment. That's abuse. And it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But I do mess up, Elena said desperately. I do forget things. I do talk back sometimes. Maybe if I was just better. No. I knelt beside her bed and took her freezing hands in mine. Listen to me, Elena Grace. I've known you since the day you were born. You are smart and kind and good. You are not perfect. Nobody. But you don't deserve any of this. Not 1 second of it. Grandpa? She collapsed against me, sobbing, and I held her tight while Officer Martinez stepped out into the hallway. I could hear raised voices, Marcus arguing, Bethany's sharp tones, and Officer Martinez's calm but firm responses. Am I going to have to leave? Elena whispered against my shoulder. One way or another, I said. You're not staying in this house tonight. The door opened, and Officer Martinez came back in with a blanket. A proper, thick blanket that she must have retrieved from somewhere downstairs. Elena, we're going to have you seen by a medical professional to make sure you're okay. Your father and stepmother are being detained for questioning. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay tonight? Elena looked up at me, hope and fear warring in her expression. She's coming home with me, I said, making the decision in that instant. She's coming home where she belongs. Officer Martinez nodded. Pack what you need, honey. You're leaving with your grandfather tonight. What happened next? Moved with the swift efficiency of official intervention. An ambulance arrived to check Elena for signs of hypothermia or frostbite. The EMTs, a kind older woman and a young man who couldn't have been much older than Elena herself, wrapped her in heated blankets and checked her vital signs while I stood guard, ready to fight anyone who tried to separate us again. She's lucky, the female EMT said quietly to Officer Martinez. Another hour or two and we'd be looking at serious frostbite. As it is, she's got mild hypothermia and some concerning circulation issues in her extremities. She needs to be kept warm and monitored closely tonight. Marcus and Bethany were in the living room, separated and being questioned by Officers Martinez and Thompson. I could hear Marcus's voice rising and falling, alternating between indignant anger and calculated calmness. Bethany remained silent, her lawyer apparently already en route. A social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia Chen, who'd clearly been called away from her own Friday evening. She spent 20 minutes alone with Elena, asking quiet questions and taking detailed notes. When she emerged, she pulled me aside into the kitchen. Mr. Burke, I've submitted an emergency custody order to have Elena removed from this home pending investigation. The judge will review it tonight or tomorrow morning at the latest. In the meantime, Elena can stay with you, provided you pass a quick background check. I'll pass any check you want to run, I said. Patricia nodded. I believe you. I've seen enough of these cases to know real concern when I see it. She glanced toward the living room where Marcus was still arguing his case. That man, he honestly believes he's done nothing wrong. That's what makes him dangerous. Background check took less than an hour. A few phone calls, some typing on a laptop, questions about my living situation and financial stability. I answered everything honestly. Retired machinist with a pension, clean record except for one speeding ticket in 1997, two-bedroom apartment with plenty of space for a granddaughter who desperately needed safety and stability. Patricia approved me on the spot. Packing Elena's belongings took longer than I expected, not because she had so much, but because she had so little. One suitcase held most of her clothes. Simple, practical things with none of the personality or style I remembered from her younger years. A backpack contained her school supplies and a few textbooks. A small box held the treasures she'd accumulated over 16 years. Photos of Victoria, a necklace I'd given her for her 13th birthday, a worn copy of Anne of Green Gables that had been her grandmother's. "Is this everything?" I asked, looking at the sparse collection. Elena nodded. Bethany said too many belongings distracted from homework and character development. Character development? As if my bright, funny granddaughter needed her character developed by a woman who'd married into wealth and wielded it like a weapon. Marcus blocked our path as we tried to leave, Officer Thompson's hand on his shoulder, the only thing keeping him from physically stopping us. "Elena," he said, his voice controlled but with an edge of desperation, "think about what you're doing. Think about how this will affect our family, your future, your relationship with your brothers." "They're not my brothers," Elena said quietly. "They're Bethany's sons, and you made that very clear when you took my picture down and replaced it with theirs." Marcus flinched like she'd slapped him. "I'm your father. I'm trying to raise you right, to prepare you for the real world. By locking me in cold rooms, by starving me, by making me feel like everything I do is wrong." Elena's voice was getting stronger, louder. "That's not parenting, Dad. That's cruelty." "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, but he was looking at me now, not his daughter. "Dad, please don't take her away. We can work this out as a family. I'll do better, I promise. Just don't destroy our family like this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw my own father staring back at me. The same certainty that discipline and control equaled love, the same inability to see the damage being inflicted in the name of making them stronger. I'd spent my whole adult life trying not to become my father, and somehow I'd raised a son who'd inherited all his worst traits. "I'm not destroying your family," I said quietly. "I'm saving my granddaughter. There's a difference." We walked out into the freezing February night. Elena's belongings tucked in my truck bed, her hand firmly in mine. Behind us, I could hear Marcus shouting something, could see neighbors gathered on their porches and peering through windows, the scandal of it all already spreading through the subdivision's social networks. I didn't care. Elena was safe. That was all that mattered. The drive back to Toledo was quiet. Elena sat wrapped in heated blankets, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. I didn't push her to talk, just kept the heat high and the radio low, letting her process everything at her own pace. It wasn't until we were pulling into my apartment complex that she finally spoke. "Grandma would have come sooner, wouldn't she?" The question hit me like a physical blow, because it was true. Victoria would have seen the signs I'd missed, would have acted months or even years ago. She tried to warn me about Marcus's controlling tendencies, tried to express concern about Elena's increasingly rare visits, but I dismissed her worries as motherly overreaction. "Yes," I said honestly. "She would have. I'm sorry I didn't." "You came when it mattered most." I pulled into my parking spot and turned off the engine. We sat there in silence for a moment, the tick of the cooling engine the only sound. "Elena, I need you to understand something. What happened tonight, that's not the end of this. There will be investigations, possibly court hearings, definitely a lot of difficult conversations. Your father won't give up custody easily. It's going to be messy and hard and probably painful. I know. But I promise you, I swear on your grandmother's memory, I will fight for you. Every single day, as long as it takes, I will fight to make sure you're safe and loved and never have to fear your own home again." She looked at me with Victoria's eyes, and I saw strength there that shouldn't have existed in someone so young. Strength forged through suffering, but not broken by it. "I know, Grandpa. That's why I pressed my hand against the window. I knew if you saw me, you'd come." We went inside together, and I showed her to the spare bedroom, Victoria's craft room that I'd barely been able to enter since she died. Now, I was glad I'd left it mostly intact, with the daybed she'd used for afternoon reading and the cheerful yellow curtains she'd sewn by hand. "It's perfect," Elena said, running her hand over the quilt Victoria had made, one with a pattern of interlocking wedding rings in shades of blue and gold. "Tomorrow, we'll go shopping. Get you some proper winter clothes and whatever else you need. Tonight, you just need to rest and get warm." "Grandpa?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for believing me." I hugged her tight, this brave girl who'd endured so much and somehow still had hope. "Always," I said. "I will always believe you." The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and found Elena in my small kitchen attempting to make breakfast. She'd found the eggs and bread, but she was moving slowly, wincing with every motion. "Everything hurts," she admitted when she saw me watching, "like my whole body was frozen and is now thawing out." "That's the hypothermia aftermath," I said, gently taking over at the stove. "You're going to feel rough for a few days. The EMT said to keep you warm, hydrated, and monitor for any signs of complications." "What kind of complications?" "Nothing you need to worry about right now. Just tell me if you feel dizzy, nauseous, or if your fingers or toes start hurting worse instead of better." We ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of fork against plate. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls from Marcus, from Bethany's lawyer, from Patricia Chen, from a number I didn't recognize that I assumed was some kind of family court representative. I ignored them all. Saturday morning was for Elena, for making sure she felt safe and giving her space to decompress from the trauma. "What happens next?" she asked as I poured her more orange juice. "Next, we wait for the judge to review Patricia's emergency custody order. Then we'll probably have a hearing within the next week or two to determine more permanent arrangements." "And if the judge says I have to go back?" I set down the orange juice carton and looked at her seriously. "Then we appeal, and we keep appealing, and we bring in therapists and doctors and anyone else who will testify about what happened to you. Your father, Elena, what he did wasn't just bad parenting. It was criminal child endangerment at minimum. The justice system doesn't always work perfectly, but in cases this clear-cut, it usually works." "Usually," she repeated, catching the qualification. "Nothing in life is guaranteed except death and taxes," I said, quoting one of Victoria's favorite phrases. "But I've got some advantages your father doesn't." "Like what?" "Like the truth. Like documentation of your hypothermia, like Officer Martinez's testimony, like the fact that your father and stepmother were so confident in their righteousness that they didn't even try to hide what they were doing." I sat down across from her. "And like the fact that you're 16, which means in Ohio, the courts will consider your preferences about where you want to live." Hope flickered across her face. "Really? Really? You're not a little kid anymore. Judges give weight to the wishes of teenagers, especially in cases where abuse is alleged." "Not alleged," Elena said quietly. "Documented." "You're right. I'm sorry. Documented abuse." My phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. A text from Patricia Chen asking me to call her when I had a moment. I excused myself and took the call in the living room. "Richard," Patricia said without preamble, "the judge approved emergency custody. Elena is legally in your care for the next 30 days, pending a full hearing. Your son's attorney has already filed a motion to have her returned immediately, but the judge denied it based on the medical evidence and Officer Martinez's report." I felt tension. I didn't know I'd been carrying drain from my shoulders. What about visitation? Supervised only, and only if Elena agrees to it. The judge was, let's say, very unimpressed with your son's actions. Good. There's more. The district attorney is reviewing the case to determine if criminal charges are warranted. Child endangerment, at minimum. Possibly felony charges, depending on how the medical evaluation shakes out. How do you think it'll shake out? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I've seen a lot of abuse cases, Richard. This one is particularly egregious because of the premeditation involved. Your son deliberately created dangerous conditions and maintained them for hours. That's not a heat-of-the-moment loss of control. That's calculated punishment that crossed into torture. Torture. The word hung in the air like a physical weight. Does Elena know? I asked. Not yet. I wanted to give her a few days to stabilize before hitting her with more legal proceedings, but she'll need to be interviewed again, probably multiple times. Is she up for that? I glanced back toward the kitchen where Elena was washing our breakfast dishes, moving slowly but with determination. She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for, I said, but I won't let anyone push her before she's ready. Fair enough. I'll be in touch early next week to schedule everything. In the meantime, make sure she sees a doctor for a full physical. We'll need medical documentation of any other injuries or signs of prolonged abuse. After I hung up, I returned to the kitchen to find Elena had finished the dishes and was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot, where a few cars were digging out from last night's light snowfall. Everything okay? She asked without turning around. Better than okay. The judge approved emergency custody. You're staying here for at least the next month, and your dad's request to have you returned was denied. She turned, and I saw tears in her eyes, but these weren't tears of fear or sadness. These were relief, pure and simple. I don't have to go back? Not unless you want to, and I can't imagine why you would. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years, bright and genuine and full of life. I don't. I really, really don't. The following week moved in a blur of appointments and paperwork. Elena saw Dr. Morrison, my longtime physician, for a comprehensive physical. The exam revealed what I'd feared, evidence of prolonged stress, malnutrition, and multiple old injuries that had healed improperly. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but a pattern that painted a clear picture of systematic neglect and abuse. How long has this been going on? Dr. Morrison asked me privately after the exam. Best guess, since Marcus remarried 3 years ago. Maybe longer, but that's when it escalated. Dr. Morrison shook his head, his weathered face lined with concern. This girl has been living in survival mode for years. Her cortisol levels are through the roof. She's underweight by nearly 20 pounds, and she shows signs of chronic sleep deprivation. Not to mention the healing fracture in her left wrist that nobody apparently thought to treat properly. Fracture? About 6 months old, I'd estimate. Healed on its own, but not correctly. She said she fell down the stairs and her father told her it was just a sprain, not worth going to the hospital for. I felt my hands curl into fists. Can you document all of this? Already am. I'll have a full report ready for your custody hearing. He paused, studying me carefully. Richard, you did the right thing. Some parents, they're so good at hiding what they do, or so charismatic that nobody believes the victim, but Elena's injuries tell a story that can't be disputed. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at the Bowling Green Family Court. Patricia Chen prepped us thoroughly, what to expect, how the process would work, what questions Elena might be asked. Your father's attorney is going to try to paint you as a troubled teenager, she warned Elena during one of our preparation sessions. They'll say you're lying for attention, that you're exaggerating normal parental discipline, that you're manipulating your grandfather. Elena's jaw tightened. Let them try. I've got Dr. Morrison's report. I've got Officer Martinez's testimony. I've got medical proof. You do, Patricia agreed, but I need you to be prepared for how hard they'll come at you. Your father has hired one of the best family law attorneys in the region, Gregory Thornton. He's going to be aggressive. Good, Elena said with a steel in her voice that reminded me of Victoria. I'm ready. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, looking at the photo of Victoria on the mantel, wishing desperately that she was here to tell me I was doing the right thing, that I wasn't destroying what was left of our family for nothing. I miss you, I whispered to her picture. I miss your wisdom and your patience and your ability to see through people's bullshit. Marcus is going to hate me forever for this. Sarah's already called twice asking me what the hell I'm thinking, taking his daughter away from him. Everyone thinks I'm overreacting. Elena appeared in the doorway, wrapped in Victoria's old bathrobe. I heard you talking. Couldn't sleep either? She shook her head and came to sit beside me on the couch. I'm scared about tomorrow. Me too. What if the judge doesn't believe me? What if they make me go back? I put my arm around her shoulders. Then we fight harder. We appeal. We don't give up. Grandpa. Why did Dad change? I remember when I was little, before Mom left, he was different. He used to take me to the park and read me stories. When did he become? She couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know, I said honestly. I've been asking myself the same question. Your grandmother, she tried to warn me years ago that Marcus had my father's temperament. That need for control, that belief that love means discipline and discipline means dominance. I didn't listen because I didn't want to believe I'd passed on those traits. It's not your fault. Maybe not directly, but I made excuses for him. I saw the warning signs and told myself they were normal, that he was just a strict parent, that kids these days needed firm guidance. I failed you, Elena. I failed to protect you when you needed it most. She was quiet for a long moment. But you protected me when it counted. That has to mean something. It means everything, I said. It means second chances exist. It means we can break the cycle. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the late-night traffic pass by on the street below, each of us preparing in our own way for the battle ahead. Thursday morning dawned cold and bright, the kind of February day that promises spring is coming eventually, but isn't here yet. Elena dressed carefully in clothes we'd bought together earlier in the week, a simple navy dress that made her look older than 16, more mature and credible. I wore my one good suit, the one I'd bought for Victoria's funeral and hadn't worn since. The Bowling Green family court building was a modern structure of glass and concrete that tried hard to look welcoming and failed. Inside, the halls echoed with the sound of other families in crisis, crying children, arguing parents, lawyers speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Patricia met us in the lobby. Judge Weaver is presiding. She's fair but tough, doesn't tolerate games or manipulation. She'll hear testimony from both sides, review the evidence, and make a determination about temporary custody pending a full investigation. How long will that take? I asked. The hearing? 2 to 3 hours probably. The full investigation? Could be months. Marcus was already in the courtroom when we entered, sitting at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s who radiated expensive competence. Bethany sat behind them in the gallery, her face carefully neutral. When Marcus saw Elena, something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, anger, regret, but his expression smoothed into careful blankness almost immediately. Elena's hand found mine and squeezed tight. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Weaver. Judge Weaver was a black woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. She took her seat, arranged some papers, and looked down at both tables with the expression of someone who'd seen too many families destroy themselves. In the matter of Green versus Burke, custody dispute regarding minor child Elena Marie Green. Mr. Thornton, you're representing the father? Yes, Your Honor. Gregory Thornton stood smoothly. Marcus Green, seeking return of his daughter who was removed from his home under questionable circumstances. Questionable? Judge Weaver's eyebrow raised slightly. The police report indicates the child was found suffering from hypothermia in a 43-degree room after being forced to sit by an open window for over 6 hours. That seems fairly unquestionable to me. With respect, Your Honor, there are significant discrepancies between what my client's daughter told the police and what actually occurred. We intend to show that Eleanor Green has a history of exaggeration and attention-seeking behavior, and that the grandfather, Richard Burke, has a documented bias against his son's current marriage. Ms. Chen, you're representing Mr. Burke? Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. And the child herself. We have substantial evidence of ongoing abuse, including medical documentation, police testimony, and Elena's own account. This is not a custody dispute between parents. This is a rescue from a dangerous situation. Strong words, Miss Chen. I hope you can back them up. Let's begin with testimony. Mr. Thornton, call your first witness. Marcus took the stand, hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. He looked every inch the respectable suburban father. Expensive suit, perfect grooming, expression of wounded bewilderment. Thornton led him through a carefully crafted narrative. Elena had always been a difficult child, especially since the divorce from her mother 7 years ago. She resented Bethany and the new family structure. She was manipulative, prone to exaggeration, frequently defiant of reasonable house rules. Mr. Green, can you describe what happened on the evening of February 17th? I'd sent Eleanor to her room after she was disrespectful to my wife at breakfast, Marcus said, his voice carefully modulated. Just normal discipline. Go to your room and think about your behavior. When my father showed up and started pounding on the door, I tried to explain the situation, but he was already convinced I was some kind of monster. He forced his way in, turned my daughter against me, and removed her from our home. And the open window in Eleanor's room? Eleanor opened it herself. She does that sometimes when she's angry, dramatic gestures for attention. I didn't realize it was still open until the police arrived. Did you at any point force her to sit by an open window in freezing temperatures? Absolutely not. That's a fabrication. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Green, you testified that you didn't know the window was open. Is that correct? That's correct. But Officer Martinez's report states that when she entered Eleanor's room, the window had been open long enough for snow to accumulate on the floor, at least several inches worth. Wouldn't you have noticed that much snow when you checked on your daughter? Marcus hesitated. I didn't check on her after sending her to her room. You didn't check on her for over 6 hours? I was giving her space to reflect on her behavior. In a room with an open window in 12-degree weather? I didn't know about the window. Patricia pulled out a document. Your home has a smart thermostat system, correct? One that monitors temperature in each room? Yes, but... And according to records from that system, which we subpoenaed, Eleanor's room temperature began dropping at approximately 12:15 p.m. and reached 43 degrees by 6 p.m. The system sent multiple alerts to your phone about the unusual temperature drop. Did you not receive those alerts? The courtroom was silent. Marcus's face had gone pale. I may have seen them, but I assumed it was a system glitch. A glitch that lasted for 6 hours while your daughter developed hypothermia? Objection, Thornton said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Weaver said. But I'd like an answer to the question, Mr. Green. Did you or did you not know that your daughter's room was dangerously cold? Marcus's carefully constructed facade cracked. I knew the room was cold. I thought it would teach her a lesson about being cold and unwelcoming to her stepmother. But I didn't think it would hurt her. I was going to let her come down for dinner. I never meant... Thank you, Mr. Green. That's all. Patricia returned to her seat, and I could see the victory in her eyes. Eleanor testified next, and watching her take the stand was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She looked so small up there, so vulnerable, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. She described years of escalating abuse, the isolation, the food restriction, the punishments that went far beyond normal discipline, the fear that had become her constant companion, the way Bethany had encouraged Marcus's behavior, framing it as high standards and preparing her for the real world. Thornton tried to shake her story, tried to paint her as a dramatic teenager seeking attention, but Elena didn't waver. When he asked why she hadn't told anyone sooner, her answer silenced the courtroom. "Because I tried," she said simply. "I tried to tell my teachers, but Dad is friends with the principal, and he convinced them I was just acting out. I tried to tell my mom, but she lives in Arizona and said she couldn't do anything from there. I tried to hint to Grandpa, but I didn't want to worry him because Grandma had just died, and he was already sad. So I just survived. Until I couldn't anymore." Dr. Morrison testified about her medical condition. Officer Martinez described the scene she'd found. Patricia presented phone records showing Elena had tried to call me 17 times over the past 3 months. Calls Marcus had blocked without telling me. By the time closing arguments came, the outcome felt inevitable. Judge Weaver didn't take long to deliberate. She returned after only 20 minutes, and her expression was grave. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony, and I'm deeply troubled by what I've heard today. Mr. Green, you admitted under oath to deliberately subjecting your daughter to dangerous conditions as punishment. That's not discipline. That's criminal child endangerment, and I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney for a review. Regarding custody, I'm granting temporary sole custody to Richard Burke for a period of 6 months, at which point we'll revisit the situation. Mr. Green, you will have supervised visitation only, twice per month, pending completion of court-mandated therapy and parenting classes. If you fail to complete these requirements, I will consider making Mr. Burke's custody permanent. Elena, I want you to understand something. You are not responsible for your father's choices. You did nothing to deserve what happened to you, and I hope that living with your grandfather will give you the safety and stability you need to heal." Marcus stood abruptly. "Your Honor, please sit down, Mr. Green, unless you want to be held in contempt." Judge Weaver's voice could have cut glass. "I'm a parent myself. I understand the challenges of raising teenagers, but what you did crossed every line. Be grateful I'm not recommending criminal charges immediately." As we left the courtroom, Marcus tried to approach Elena one more time. "Sweetheart, please, I love you. I was just trying to make you strong." Elena looked at her father with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but something worse. Pity. "I know you love me, Dad," she said quietly, "but your love hurts, and I can't let you hurt me anymore." We walked out into the cold February afternoon, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe properly. Elena slipped her hand into mine, and we stood there on the courthouse steps, watching the traffic pass by. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go home," I said, "and we start healing." 6 months later, summer arrived in Toledo with a vengeance, the kind of heat that made the whole city shimmer and sent everyone seeking air conditioning and cold drinks. My apartment had become something different over the past 6 months. Not just a place where an old man waited out his retirement, but a real home filled with life and noise and purpose. Elena's room had transformed from Victoria's craft space into a teenage girl's domain. Posters covered the walls, bands I'd never heard of, movie stars I didn't recognize, and one large photo of Victoria that Elena had framed herself. Her bookshelf overflowed with novels and textbooks. Her desk held a laptop we'd bought together, covered in stickers that proclaimed her interests and values. She'd gained the weight Dr. Morrison wanted to see, filled out into the healthy young woman she was meant to be. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. The tension in her shoulders had eased. She laughed freely now, argued with me about politics and music, brought friends over who treated my apartment like a second home. The custody hearing had ended with Judge Weaver making my temporary custody permanent. Marcus had completed his court-mandated therapy, but had only exercised his supervised visitation rights 3 times in 6 months. The last time, according to the social worker who supervised the visit, he'd spent most of the 2 hours trying to convince Elena that he'd been right all along, that she'd misunderstood his intentions. Elena had walked out after an hour and hadn't requested another visit. The criminal charges had been reduced to a misdemeanor with probation after Marcus pled guilty. His marriage to Bethany had ended in divorce 3 months ago. He'd lost his job and moved to Cleveland to live with his sister. Sometimes I felt guilty about how completely his life had unraveled. Then, I'd remember Elena sitting in that frozen room and the guilt would evaporate. Sarah had come around eventually, flying in from California to meet with Elena and hear her story firsthand. She'd left in tears apologizing for doubting me, for not seeing what Marcus had become. Now she called every week to check on her niece, and we were planning a family trip to visit her in August. Elena had finished her junior year with straight A's and was already looking at colleges. Engineering programs mostly, following in the footsteps of her grandfather just like she'd always dreamed. She worked part-time at the library downtown, had joined the school's robotics club, and had started seeing a therapist named Dr. Reeves who specialized in helping teens recover from family trauma. This particular Saturday morning found us in the kitchen together, making breakfast before Elena's shift at the library. She was telling me about a boy named David who'd asked her to the upcoming school dance, seeking advice about whether she should say yes. "Do you like him?" I asked, flipping pancakes. "I think so. He's nice. He makes me laugh. He doesn't try to control me or tell me what to do." She paused. "Is that a low bar? Should I have higher standards than doesn't try to control me?" "For now, that's a perfectly reasonable standard," I said. "Eventually, as you heal more, you'll develop higher bars. But right now, prioritizing partners who respect your autonomy is exactly right." She nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Reeves said something similar, that I need to learn to trust my own judgment again before I can form healthy relationships. My phone buzzed, a text from Dennis asking if I wanted to go fishing next weekend. I showed it to Elena. "Think you can survive without me for a Saturday?" "I think I can manage," she said with a grin. "Might throw a wild party, invite 50 of my closest friends, trash the place. As long as you clean up before I get home." We fell into comfortable silence, eating our breakfast and reading different sections of the newspaper. These quiet moments were my favorite, proof that trauma didn't have to define us forever, that healing was possible with time and safety and love. "Grandpa," Elena said suddenly, setting down her fork, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "I want to change my last name, from Green to Burke." I looked up, surprised. "Elena, you don't have to do that. I know you're angry with your father, but it's not about anger," she interrupted. "Or not just about anger. It's about choosing my own identity. Dad gave me the name Green, but you and Grandma gave me everything else that matters. I want my name to reflect that." "What does your therapist say about this?" "She says it's my choice, that reclaiming my identity is part of healing. But I wanted to make sure you were okay with it first." I felt tears prickling at my eyes. "Elena Grace Burke. It has a nice ring to it. You think Grandma would approve?" "I think your grandmother would be proud of the young woman you're becoming. And I think she'd love that you want to carry her name forward." Elena smiled. That brilliant smile that reminded me so much of Victoria, it sometimes took my breath away. "Then that's what I want to do. Will you help me with the paperwork?" "Of course." She came around the table and hugged me tight. "Thank you for everything, for believing me when nobody else did, for fighting for me, for giving me a home where I feel safe." "You don't need to thank me for that," I said, hugging her back. "That's what family does." "Real family," she corrected. "The family you choose, not just the one you're born into." After she left for work, I sat alone in the apartment that had once felt so empty and now felt so full. Victoria's picture smiled at me from the mantel, and I could almost hear her voice saying, "I told you so," in that gentle, loving way she'd had. "You were right," I said to her picture, "about Marcus, about the importance of protecting family, about second chances. I'm sorry it took me so long to listen." The apartment was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet now, not the silence of loneliness, but the contentment of a life being well lived. My phone rang. Elena calling from work. "Hey, Grandpa, I forgot to ask, do you still have Grandma's meatloaf recipe? I was thinking I could make it for dinner tonight." "I've got it somewhere. Check the recipe box on top of the fridge." "Found it. Okay, I'll pick up ground beef on my way home. Love you." "Love you too, sweetheart." I hung up and smiled, thinking about how Victoria would have loved teaching Elena to make her famous meatloaf, how she would have reveled in having this second chance to shape a young woman's life. The winter night I'd kicked down Marcus's door felt like a lifetime ago. The anger, the fear, the desperate race to save my granddaughter, all of it had led to this. A teenage girl calling from work to say she was making dinner, using her grandmother's recipe in the home where she finally felt safe. Outside, the summer sun beat down on Toledo, promising thunderstorms later. But for now, the sky was clear and bright, full of possibility, just like our future. Epilogue. 2 years later. Elena's high school graduation fell on a perfect May afternoon, the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings. I sat in the crowded auditorium of Toledo Central High School, wedged between Sarah and her husband Tom, watching as students filed across the stage in their caps and gowns. When they called Elena Grace Burke, my chest swelled with pride so intense it was almost painful. She walked across that stage with her head high, accepted her diploma, and looked right at me in the audience. The smile she gave me was pure joy, the smile of someone who'd survived hell and come out stronger on the other side. She'd been accepted to Ohio State's engineering program with a full academic scholarship. She'd won an award for her robotics team's performance at the state championship. She'd written a college essay about resilience and survival that had made her college counselor cry. She'd built a life worth living. After the ceremony, we gathered for photos outside. Me, Sarah, Tom, and Elena's small group of close friends. David was there too, still her boyfriend after 2 years of the kind of healthy, respectful relationship I'd hoped she'd find. Marcus hadn't come. He'd been invited, technically, but Elena hadn't really expected him to show up. He'd sent a card with a check and a note saying he was proud of her. She'd deposited the check and thrown away the note. Some wounds healed with time. Others just became scars you learn to live with. Speech, speech, Sarah called out, and Elena laughed and held up her hands. Okay. I just want to say thank you to everyone who helped me get here. To my Aunt Sarah for flying in. To my friends for never giving up on me. To Dr. Reeves for helping me find myself again. She looked directly at me, and her eyes were shining. And to my grandpa for being the kind of hero who shows up when it matters most. Grandma always said you were stubborn and protective and loved too fiercely. She was right about all of it. Thank you for saving my life. Later, at the celebration dinner we'd organized at Elena's favorite Italian restaurant, Sarah pulled me aside. Mom would be so proud, she said quietly, of both of you. I wish she was here to see this. I think she is. In every choice Elena makes, every boundary she sets, every time she stands up for herself, that's Mom's legacy living on. I thought about Victoria, about how she'd tried to warn me about Marcus's control issues years ago, how she'd always put family first, how she'd loved fiercely and protected relentlessly. Elena had inherited all her best qualities. As we drove home that night, Elena in the passenger seat of my truck, just like that terrible February night 2 years ago, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Victoria died. Grandpa, Elena said, as we pulled into our parking spot. Yeah? Do you ever regret it, losing your relationship with Dad to save me? I turned off the engine and looked at her seriously. Elena, I didn't lose a relationship. I found out what kind of man my son had become, and I chose you over him. That's not a loss. That's the easiest choice I ever made. But he's still your son, and you're my granddaughter. The difference is you needed me, and he needed to face consequences. If loving you means Marcus doesn't speak to me anymore, I'll take that trade every single day. She hugged me tight. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Elena Grace Burke. Now let's go inside. We've got a graduation cake that's not going to eat itself. We walked into our home together. This old man and this young woman who'd found each other when they both needed family most. The apartment was filled with decorations Sarah had put up earlier, balloons and streamers that said, "Congratulations, graduate." This was what family looked like, not perfect, not without scars, but built on a foundation of truth and protection and unconditional love. Victoria would have approved, and that more than anything made it all worthwhile. The coffee shop near Ohio State's campus was bustling with students cramming for finals when I walked in that December afternoon. Elena had texted me to meet her here, said she had something important to tell me.